Welcome to another episode of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast showing that the fans sitting in the nosebleeds know just as much as those sitting courtside. And Kyler and Landon, we are getting closer and closer every day to the 2023 NBA draft, where we will finally know what the Jazz are going to do with their 9th, 16th, and 28th picks. So the fact that we only have a couple weeks left means that we're going to be talking a ton this episode about the draft, specifically diving into picks we think the Jazz might take with their 16th or 28th pick. Along with in the second part of this episode, we're going to go through some of the biggest names that have already worked out with the Jazz, according to Rookie Wire on USA Today. So, but before we get into what we have planned to talk about today, as we get closer and closer to the draft, Landon, is there anything that you feel differently about than you have in what the Jazz should do or their strategy should be than you did with our first 3 episodes of this season?
I'm riding with Grady Dick and Nick Smith Jr. They're the future of our franchise.
All right, so Landon, I don't know if he's learned anything since we started doing podcasting, but I love your confidence, even if you're wrong.
Well, is he wrong though? Like, it's getting to the point where so many mocks have Grady Dick to the Jazz that I'm wondering if these people have inside information that the Jazz are like really like Grady Dick. Like, I'm mentally preparing myself for that because it's so commonly mocked. Like, with Taylor Hendricks on the board, with like other guys that would be better fits for the Jazz, like a ton of mocks are saying Grady Dick to the Jazz. And so, like it or not, you probably have to at least mentally prepare for that being the pick, because it's just uncanny. Like, as a guy who, I mean, I love the NFL draft even more than the NBA draft, but like sometimes when everybody's mocking the same pick, that ends up being the pick.
Which I think at this point we just have to start to potentially emotionally prepare for it. I'm not high on Grady Dick. I know that Kyler's not as high on Grady Dick. Landon gave a treatise as to why he loves Grady Dick back in our first episode 3 weeks ago. But I guess we'll see if that happens on draft night. But Kyler, is there anything else that you're feeling differently as we start to get closer to draft?
No, not necessarily. But I do have an announcement to make since the time is mine. Starting this episode, I will have my big board available. I'm trying to get to 50. I'm not there yet, but it'll be a link to a Google Sheet. It'll be in the description of this video. So anyone who's interested in how I view this draft, you'll be able to see my big board. I'm in the 30s right now. I'm hoping to just get a top 50 by the time the draft comes. So that should be fun.
Can't wait to see the comments on that. I should have mine ready in probably another 3 or 4 days. I'm just finalizing mine on my end. Landon, I don't know if you're making one as well, but we definitely want to publish how we're feeling ahead of the draft.
Yeah, I'll definitely have mine out probably sometime this weekend so you guys can look at it. I'm excited. I think I'm going to have some fun with it.
Always have fun with it. I mean, like, what is the point of talking about the Jazz in the offseason when there aren't any games if it's not super fun to talk about? But now let's start to actually focus in less on the draft in general and more on specific players that the Jazz could potentially take. If you're looking for more information about who the Jazz should take at 9, look at some of our previous episode, as specifically we're going to be talking about guys they could potentially take at 16 or 28. Per our usual, we each have a player that we brought that we'd like to see the Jazz potentially take, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. First, we're going to go with Kyler, who's going to be telling us about one of the guys that I would personally love to see the Jazz pick up at 16.
Yeah, I mean, and I've already talked about this player in passing many times because he is yet another in the list of defensive guards that I think this class is just chock full of, much more than any other drafts I've been really diving into. I haven't really been doing this for that long, so that's not saying like an incredible amount, but of the few drafts I've done, this is easily the best. And Kobe Bufkin, somebody that the closer we're getting to the draft, the higher he's rising on my board. He's up to 11 now, but 6'4", played at Michigan. He's the guy every night he was asked to guard the team's best perimeter offensive player. Really good defender. I think he's going to need to add strength to be that kind of defender in the NBA, though. I think he has a little bit lean. He shot 71% at the rim this last college season, which is like a number for 7-footers, like centers, like so a lot of touch around the rim. And this is for a guy that's not that athletic. Of kind of these defensive point guards that I've been talking about, I've talked about one in like every episode, it seems. He's the least athletic, but he's the best scorer. He showed ability to score at all three levels. If you like the little Joe Ingles kind of the little scoop shot, he's got that in his bag. The reason he scored so well around the rim is because he's got a deep variety of moves at the rim. It's not because he's blowing past guys and getting easy shots. The one thing that holds him back, he's a pretty divisive player in this class. A lot of people are high on him, but some are low, is because he's not really a point guard yet. Offensively, he was asked to be a 2-guard for Michigan. Whereas if you're going to be high on him as a defensive player, you're probably going to need him to play point guard. In terms of passing and in terms of like this deep bag of dribbling moves, that's really what he lacks. And he's going to be more of a long-term project. I personally believe he can make the transition to point guard. I saw enough of him playmaking, at least out of the pick and roll. It's kind of the non-pick and roll scenarios that you need him to improve kind of his playmaking. He actually had a really low turnover rate, but that's because he's kind of vanilla. He wasn't like trying to make a lot of plays or anything. It was kind of making the easy reads and not much else in terms of his playmaking package. So of these, he's like the least point guardy of all these two-way point guards, but the best scorer, also the smallest, also the least athletic, but really good defender, and has the most kind of day one ready scoring package. So I really like him. Having him at 11, would love him at 16.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. Like, I think it just shows how crazy this draft is that we've gone this far and haven't even talked about Kobe Bufkin. I like him too. I think he's an awesome player. I would love for the Jazz to get him. At this point, I'd be surprised if he stuck around at 16. I think he's moving up a lot of people's draft boards, but I'd be ecstatic. I think he can really solidify himself as a starting guard in the NBA. What his ceiling is, it's tough to tell. If he's going to have to bulk up, then we'll see what he can do. But yeah, I mean, he's got a great stroke. I think he's just a solid player.
He's definitely a guy where it's going to be interesting to see exactly where he goes to on draft night, just because, as we've stated 10,000 times, there's so many defensive point guards in this class. But as I look into him, I think what makes me excited about Kobe Bufkin and the idea of him potentially coming to the Jazz that gets me excited is because he's one of those few guys that I can see past like that 9 range, where I could actually see a path where he could potentially become like an all-star caliber player. Now, just to make it clear, I'm not saying that he's going to become that, but just his two-way impact, his scoring ability, his defensive ability, he just looks to be someone that the best version of Kobe Bufkin might be an all-star. And I don't think that there's a ton of players past that 9 range, like that consensus top 9-ish, that I can really say that about, where I can see that path being clear for him. So he's obviously got some work to do with playmaking. He's obviously got some work to do in terms of his body. He's super skinny. So seeing how he's going to be able to guard at the next level is going to be interesting, kind of like Kyler said. But the Jazz aren't looking to win now. So if you can get a good strength and conditioning coach with him, you can continue to help him develop as a playmaker. You can help him develop a shot a little bit. I mean, I can see him as being a guy who could be a really, really impactful point guard at the next level on both ends of the court.
I'm starting to get nervous. Like this whole draft process, I guess there's one thing that I think has changed. I'm starting to think they're all 3 or 4, I guess, are going to be gone by 16. Which worries me because I'm doing a mock draft because we're watching the draft together and we had to do a mock draft for that. So I started on it. And like, but in between that 10, well, I guess 9, including us, to 4 to 16 range, there's a lot of teams that could draft a point guard, I feel. So I really hope one of those 4 is there at 16. I've been banking on it this entire draft process, but there's a decent chance, I think, that maybe they won't be.
Which, just to make it clear for our listeners, we talk a lot about the 4 defensive point guards, and I'll just list them off really quickly just so that in case you're not super familiar with the draft, you know who we're talking about. The 4 defensive point guards are Anthony Black out of Arkansas, who we talked about in our first episode of the season, Cason Wallace out of Kentucky, who's probably the best point of attack defender, guard in this draft, Kobe Bufkin, who we just discussed, and Jalen Hood-Schifino, who Kyler is probably higher on than just about anybody in the whole world. So 4 fantastic point guard prospects who will go probably between 9 and 18.
Sure. It does make me more and more want the Jazz to move up in this draft. I'm being honest, the more I look into it, I think it might be worth cashing in a couple of those picks and seeing if we can, move up either that 9th or 16th pick a little bit, because there's a lot of potential on here, and I think there's a chance that we could miss out on it.
Yeah, I think if we stick at 9, and let's say 3 of the 4 are gone by like pick 13, I'd try to trade up just a couple spots, see how much it takes, because I really think we're going to talk about a couple other guys at 16, which I don't hate, especially like, if we take Anthony Black, we're not going to take another point guard at 16. But I just think 16 has been such a good spot for the point guards for me, and all the other guys, though I wouldn't mind them, I'm just not quite as high on them. So I feel like if 3 of them go and it's a cheap trade up away from 16, I would absolutely do it. I'd give 28 and some extra change if that's all it took. So
100%. All right. So we've talked about Kobe Bufkin. I promise that we will not spend another 10-minute segment talking about a defensive point guard in our next episode.
Only if you give me the chance.
All right. So we'll see if Kyler gets his chance next week. But let's go ahead and transition to a very different kind of guard, which Landon is going to be talking to us about.
Yeah, someone else who's kind of projected in that, late teens to 20s is Dereck Whitehead. He was kind of an interesting player to look at. He's got good length, good strength. He played on a Duke team, which is always stacked with talent. But at the end of the day, I think you draft him because he has one NBA ready skill and one NBA ready skill only, and that's catch and shoot shooting. It's funny looking at him. He averaged about 8 points per game in college. Again, that could be a lot of it just because of, the talent that he played with. But I think a lot of that speaks to a little bit his inability to kind of create his own shot and get that volume up. But with that said, he shot 42% from 3 last year, which is a crazy number. He shot it very consistently. He shot it good. He could shoot it contested. So I think if the Jazz are looking for spacing for perimeter shooting, he might be a guy you want to look at. He has flaws. He's a little limited. But I like his potential as a defender just because of his size and strength. And again, he can space the floor, which might work with the Jazz because of the way that they, play. They really love to spread the ball. They love using flare screens, trying to get people open in transition. He'd be a perfect fit in that sense. But again, he has a lot of development to do on the offensive end outside of that.
Yeah, my thoughts on Dereck. There's 2 ways you could take the following information. I think the reason that he was only a catch and shoot 3-pointer was because he was playing on a foot injury last year. Like, he was a very highly touted recruit, and he actually wasn't that great of a shooter prior to college. Like, he wasn't a shooter. He was and do everything else kind of guy. He was more of the shot creator. Was playing on a foot injury that he just had his second surgery on to like fully repair in this draft process. So there's 2 ways you can look at it. This guy, who before his foot injury was seen as this do-it-all offensive shot creator, was able to show that he could be a shooter as well with his foot injury, and his ceiling is high, and that makes you very high on him. Or you could see it on the flip end where this guy just had a second foot surgery in the last year. Foot or Achilles, I'm pretty sure it's foot. And so you injury red flag him. I tend to at least think he's worth the shot. If you're not taking defensive point guard, he's actually he's my favorite like non-point guard prospect, or of like a 2-3 hybrid wing kind of guy. I think he's the most athletic when he's not limited by a foot injury among all the kind of the shooters that are going to be available, like more than a Jet Howard or a Jordan Hawkins. So I would love to take just the flyer that this is a one-time injury and it just had to take 2 surgeries to get it dealt with, and that he can flash more of the all-around offensive game that he showed prior to Duke. So if they take Anthony Black or if all the point guards are gone, I would honestly love to see a Dereck Whitehead. I think he has the best two-way potential of any non-point guard that could be available at 16.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know like just how much those foot injuries kind of affected him on the court. Because like based on what I saw, just doing some research on him, there wasn't really even attempts to like do anything or try to get to the rim. It was all very much just behind the 3-point arc. So that makes me concerned about like his ability or his will to even try and, go into the paint and score in that way. If it's there, that'd be fantastic. But really, like all we have as far as what he's been able to do at a level above high school is just see him just shoot threes.
Which I think that's what makes him so hard to evaluate, is that when he was coming out of high school going into college, at one point he was like a top 5 recruit in his class. Like he was a consensus 5-star, ends up going to Duke, and then he only scores 8 points, right? Which a lot of that was limited by his injury. So it's really hard to see someone who is so highly touted, like what is he actually going to be when we don't have an accurate sample size of what his skill or anything other than shooting that he actually could get. If there is one thing I worry about him just a little bit, is that how much is he going to be able to create for himself and others? I know that the foot injury is going to answer a lot of the question on if he can create for himself, to see how well he heals from that. But he wasn't the most dynamic passer, which I would like to see if that would happen just a little bit more. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how he develops. But he's definitely a guy who, because of his just his history coming in to college, you think that he's someone who might be better than where he's currently at on a lot of people's big boards. He reminded me just a little bit of kind of the Jaden Hardy story from last year, like a top recruit who has an underwhelming college first year. And Jaden Hardy ended up going 37th, which I don't think Dereck Whitehead's going to fall that far. But then Jaden Hardy ended up being really, really good when he was playing some of those bigger minutes later in the season. And he actually got like a handful of all rookie team votes, even though he didn't make a team. So I wonder if Whitehead is going to be a guy who's going to be a candidate for that kind of storyline his rookie year, as someone who was highly touted, underwhelming college year, falls in the draft. And then people are like, oh, well, we can remember why he was so highly recruited just like a year ago.
That Hardy falling was my least favorite thing of last year's draft. I had him
as a lottery 17 on my big board.
I had him as a lottery talent on my big board. So
I didn't have him quite that high, but I had him 17. So anyway, it'll be fun. He's definitely an interesting talent at 16 for the Jazz. If he's there at 28, obviously I would love to have him at 28. He would be so much fun.
I would take him at 16. I would absolutely take him at 28.
He is not going to last that long, but if he did, it'd be amazing.
Well, I guess it depends on if people red flag him from his foot injury. But then if his foot injury is that bad, you're probably not taking him at 28 either. So I don't know. I think he's worth the swing. Like we've talked about how the Jazz have so many picks. Like at that point, you can afford to miss on some. So I'd go for upside swinging. Like I don't need a guy that's going to be guaranteed to be in my rotation long term. I got 13 other first round picks to do that, So kind of like how the Thunder lately, they've had so many picks that now they're just going, this guy's really long and athletic. He doesn't have NBA skills yet, but we'll just take the shot because we have so many picks. So we don't know what to do with them. And I think the Jazz are probably going to be doing a lot of the same.
For sure. And I love what you were talking about with that upside swinging, because the guy that I'm going to talk about, he's definitely someone who would be an upside swing for whoever decides to take him. And that is G.G. Jackson, a freshman out of South Carolina. He is the youngest player in this draft. He's only going to be 18 and a half years old at draft night. He actually reclassified. He's 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan, and he weighs about 215. So even though he's youngest guy in the draft, he looks like a man, and he looks physically impressive when you look at him play at the college level. He just looks bigger and stronger and more athletic than almost anyone that he plays against. He's a great hustler on offense. It's fun to see him always looking for those offensive rebound opportunities. You can always see him cutting to the basket, trying to get those opportunities. And he's definitely someone who's a high-level finisher. So when he gets the ball, You can trust him, at least at the college level, to be a strong offensive player and to score quite a bit of points. He's had some good 3-point flashes. He's known to be a consistent, pretty good catch and shoot 3-point shooter, but he's really struggled to create his own shot. When he had to create his own shot, he was like at, I want to say like 29%. But when somebody else was like passing him the ball and he gets spotted up, he was shooting closer to like 35, 36. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that shooting ability actually translates to the next level. With his size and with his athleticism, you would think he would be a fantastic defender. He's just okay. He's kind of an A for effort, C- for technique kind of defender. So it'll be interesting to see if he's actually good at the next level. But he's been someone who's been really interesting because when you look at a guy who's a high upside with his offensive ability and his measurables and his athleticism, you would think that he would be somebody that somebody would be willing to take a flyer on earlier in the draft, but he's recently been falling. There's been a lot of talk that he hasn't been impressive in his workouts. There's even been reports he's been canceling some of his workouts because he hasn't been performing really well in hopes of preserving some of that draft stock. But when you watch him, like when you watch his highlights, when you see him score, when you see how he looks in like a transition offensive setting, when you see him dunk, you can see that raw talent that is there, even if he is a sloppy, even if he is an unfinished player. So I don't know if I'm the Jazz if he's available at 16, if he's the guy that I would take. I currently have him 19th on my big board. But if you're looking for an upside swing at 16, it's harder to find a guy who might have a higher ceiling than G.G. Jackson.
He passes the eye test for sure. I think you're right. Looking at him playing, especially in college, a lot of what he did looked pretty smooth. He looked like a man amongst boys playing in college. There's some stuff I like about him. I think he's got great footwork, kind of Kobe Bryant-esque. I'm not saying he's like Kobe, but like in the paint, he's got some moves. He got some nice mid-range shots. So I think he's fun to watch in that way. I'm almost concerned that the league has outgrown like his style of play though, because I do think he's very good in that mid-range area. That's where his like highest ceiling seems to be, and that's just not where the league's going. But I agree. I wouldn't mind taking him with the upside swing just because of his height, his length, his athleticism. The jump shot looks good. It's not always consistent, but it looks smooth. So I think he's someone that I agree. Maybe take a chance on him if he's available at 16.
For me, G.G. Jackson, it is definitely, you said, an upside swing. If you want shot creation post lottery, it's the best you're going to get. It's probably after Cam Whitmore, the best you're going to get. He's kind of in a lot of ways like a discount Cam Whitmore, where shows you a lot as a scorer. He's an even worse playmaker than Cam Whitmore, though. When we talked about how concerning Cam Whitmore's playmaking is, he is a tunnel vision. This is my basket when I touch the ball. The bad moments are really, really bad. But if all you did was watch a highlight reel of G.G. Jackson, you think he's a top 10 guy in this draft. And so that's where the upside swing is. Shot creation, he flashed a bunch of it. But defensively, I would disagree that he's okay. A for effort, C- for execute. I give him like B- for effort and D for technique and execution. I think, but with him more than kind of the other guys that I've slammed on their defense in this draft, I think he has a higher chance of at least becoming a decent defender because the athleticism's there. He's just falls asleep and has horrible technique. Like if you like basket getting, which I typically do, and so I typically like this kind of player, but G.G. Jackson is just a little bit too much of just like, what is he gonna do? What am I confident he's gonna do besides scoring? Didn't show kind of the defensive flashes as consistent as I typically like with this kind of mold of player, because I always fall in love with someone of G.G. Jackson's ilk in every class. This one is just Maxwell Lewis. But yeah, I would take him at 28. I would not be happy if the Jazz took him at 16.
He did definitely seem to have a little like Taylor Horton Tucker in him sometimes, just with his like reckless abandon on the offensive end of the floor. So I see where you're coming from with that.
Just like, yeah, unaware of what any like help defense coming, just not a lot of. But the highlights, the shot creation flashes better than anyone else, but in every other aspect of playing basketball, one of the worst. But like you said, he has a good catch and shoot, so he can play off ball offensively too. But he's just a bucket. That's what he is. He's a walking bucket and nothing else.
Which it would definitely be interesting to see like what kind of situation he grows into and how much he develops, not just as a basketball player, but also the dude's only 18 and a half. Like how much is he going to mature, and as he gets in the right system with players who are definitely better than him, do you think that he'll be able to take more of a playmaking role where he'll try to do that a little bit more, or he'll try a little bit harder on defense? I mean, that's what you're betting on if you're going to draft GG Jackson anywhere in the teens, is you're betting that he will fundamentally change how he's played basketball in terms of what he's thinking about, who he's thinking about, how he's processing the game. Because if he doesn't do that, then he's never going to be like even a starting caliber player. Like it's so hard to be able to see that with him being a starter if he is just the GG Jackson show every night and he doesn't really care about anybody else in winning games.
Yeah, discipline will be huge. It's going to have some good coaching.
Well, that will take us to the end of part one, going over three more prospects that the Jazz could take in the latter part of the first round. If there's any more prospects you want us to break down, this is for you, the listeners. Please drop a comment. Next week will be like the last big episode before the draft. So if there's anyone else that we haven't touched on yet that you want us to touch on, let us know. We've tried to do a really good job of making sure that we're going to talk about everything you guys asked us to talk about. So please let us know, and we'll be sure to address it in the next episode. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment, where in the second half, we'll be talking about some of the guys the Jazz have been working out. Welcome back for part two, where we're going to be talking about guys the Jazz either have confirmed to have worked out or have scheduled to work out in the coming days leading up to the draft. We're going to start by going over some big names really quickly, all of which we've actually talked about previously on these episodes. So if you want a more in-depth evaluation of any of these prospects, go back and listen to our previous episodes for our full comments. But the Jazz have worked out Cam Whitmore, Grady Dick, Taylor Hendricks, and apparently Jarris Walker they're going to be working out very, very soon. All of whom might be available for the Jazz at number 9. Cam Whitmore is obviously the one where it's more questionable that he'll still be available at 9, but it's very easy to see a future where Grady Dick, Taylor Hendricks, or Jarris Walker, or even a couple of them could be available for the Jazz to pick at 9. So the two questions that I have for you in regards to these four players is, out of these four players, who would you want the Jazz most to take? And B, would you be willing to try to trade up a little bit if it meant getting one of these players? Like not trading up into like the top 4 or anything like that, but do you love any of these players enough that you'd be willing to give up a future first to move from like 9 to 7 to try to take one of these guys?
I think the answer to both is obviously Cam Whitmore. I think Landon and I have both professed our love for Cam Whitmore and our willingness to trade up for him. In episode 18, like J. Bobby said, we've talked ad nauseum about these guys more. I guess no, it wasn't 18, it was episode 19. So go watch that episode if you want me to talk about Cam Whitmore as much as give my full thoughts. But yeah, that's if you want a shot creator, kind of like with JG Jackson, but a much better version where the lows aren't nearly as low. A rare what do you call it, skill set of shot creation, not only in just this draft but in basketball in general. So that's worthy of the trade up. The other three guys, not really, just because I think they'll be there, especially Grady Dick. And if all three are gone, that means Anthony Black is there, and I'll just take Anthony Black. So
yeah, to echo that, Cam Whitmore is the answer, and the answer is yes, I would trade picks for him. Jarris Walker, I'm on the fence about. I'd probably have to be talked into trading some future first for him. I do like his upside, but I not as much as I like Cam Whitmore. If I'm going to do that, it'd probably be for Cam Whitmore and Cam Whitmore only. Not to say the other guys aren't great. If they're available at 9, I'd be ecstatic with all of them.
Yeah, and the reason I wouldn't trade up for the other guys, even though I love Jarris Walker and Taylor Hendricks, they're one spot apart on my big board, and I think one of them is going to be there. And if you miss out on one, you're getting a very similar prospect, at least defensively, in the other, and just taking a slightly different skill set offensively. So,
yeah. For me with this draft on my big board, I have a very clear like tier breaking at 9, where there's 9 guys in this draft that I love, which includes Cam Whitmore, Taylor Hendricks, and Jarris Walker. I have Grady Dick later on my big board. But with the Jazz with the number 9 pick, there's going to be a guy available to the Jazz just with the pick that they have that I absolutely love. And for me, as much as I do like Cam Whitmore, I don't see, like, at least in terms of how I've ranked my prospects, I currently have him at 8 between Jarris Walker and Taylor Hendricks. So for me, it wouldn't be worth the trade up because there's guys that I like just as much as Cam Whitmore in that same kind of area. But I think it's at least exciting to know that the guys that we most love for the Jazz at 9 who could feasibly be there, like, they're coming to Salt Lake. They're getting some serious looks by the front office. And it's not possible, it's probable that one of those guys will be in a Jazz uniform.
yeah, and based off the mocks, it's the one guy that's not. I have a top 10 tier list. It seems like a pretty consensus top 9 tier. Honestly, as I look around, mine just includes Jalen Hood-Schifino because I love the man. But Cam Whitmore, I also have a tier break after 6, and Cam Whitmore is number 6, which is why I would trade up to get him, because I do think he is in a one tier above, not just ranking, but like a full tier. So I trade up tiers. I don't trade up for guys within the same tier. That's kind of my draft philosophy.
I agree.
Anthony Black is also in the same tier as Cam Whitmore, by the way, which for me. So at the end of the day, I would love to trade up from that just because it'd be exciting and we'd get a higher chance that somebody's in my top 6 tier. But there's a possibility like Anthony Black, who is in there, could just be there at 9 anyway.
Yeah, which he hasn't worked out for the Jazz. I haven't heard any rumors about that or any reports on that, but I currently have him at 6 on my big board, and I would be just absolutely ecstatic to see him in a Jazz uniform. But it'll certainly be interesting to see who else works out for the Jazz, who are some of the big names. I mean, in terms of who could be there at 9, I don't know if we'll get too much more action between now and draft night, but it is nice to know that there are guys who are taking workouts with the Jazz and not one of these situations where you hear about guys who, I have a draft promise and I'm going to cancel all my future workouts. No, it looks like these guys are very much in the mix for them.
I think that actually happened with Cason Wallace, though, because he worked out with Washington and canceled workouts after that. So for everyone that actually loves Cason Wallace, probably going right ahead of us, which, hallelujah, that means one of the players I like actually will drop further down.
All right, perfect. Well, now that we went a quick overview of some names that we've talked about extensively in previous episodes, let's talk about 4 names that we haven't discussed at all on this podcast. Now, just to be clear, all these players that we're going to talk about, they're not going to be guys we're even going to think about taking at 9. We're not even going to think about taking at 16. These are going to be guys that we would maybe consider taking at 28, or if we trade into like the second round at some point. And just for those who have forgotten, the Jazz do not have a second round pick this year. They have their 3 firsts. They have no seconds. So if we want to get one of these guys, we're either using 28 or we're getting crafty on the back end to try to pick up one of these guys. So just keep that in mind.
It's not even that hard. The 35th pick was bought for cash last year, which the Jazz should have done because Jaden Hardy, circling back,
right there,
was still on the board. But I digress.
I know. He went at 37, which this might be a year where there's a couple of these guys that I think would definitely be worth a flyer in the early second round that I'd be willing to trade for.
Normally, I like buying into the second round, but with 3 first-round picks, you're already going to have 3 rookies. So if we end up selecting all 3, I don't know if I'd love the idea of buying into the second round just because you're already bringing in 3 rookies. So
it would certainly make more sense if they package like 16 or 28 or something like that to move up or something along those lines. But it's still very possible to see what'll happen between now and next week. But the first new player we're going to talk about is a guy who's getting a lot of buzz at kind of the very end of the first round or very early second round, and that's Trayce Jackson-Davis. He's a senior big. I'm going to use air quotes for big out of Indiana. And he's a very unique prospect in the fact that he plays center, but he's only 6'8" with a 7'1" wingspan. And his stat lines were very impressive. He scored 21 and 11 with 3 blocks. He looked dominant in the post. Even though he has a somewhat limited offensive game, he was definitely a guy who could score a lot in the paint. But there's obviously questions about his game. Is he going to be big enough to play center at the next level? Is he going to be strong enough to play center at the next level? He's been a poor free throw shooter. He was sub 70% all throughout college. So there's questions on if he'll be a decent free throw shooter, let alone ever extending his range to anywhere outside the paint. And it's a little bit difficult to know what his role is going to be. Obviously, you look at a guy like this and you wonder, well, could he be your team's small ball center who comes in for positional matchups, whatever else? But using a pick for a guy who might be valuable in some matchups, like, does that make a lot of sense for a lot of teams? So this is a player that when I watch the tape, it's fun to see him play, and you could see flashes of him being at least somewhat valuable contributor in the NBA. But it's also hard to pinpoint, does his skill set and his size equal NBA player?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot, of Trayce Jackson-Davis just because I watched a lot of Indiana for Jalen Hood-Schifino. And it was a two-man offense. Every single action was Trayce Jackson-Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino. Their offense ran through him, and he was very, very productive, like you said. All-conference level player as a senior. And honestly, his scoring was he has a really good touch around the rim. Like you said, in terms of free throw shooting and just shooting in general, didn't really show it at college. He was never even asked. I don't think I watched like 10 games of the dude, and I don't think I saw him even attempt a 3. Maybe I did, but I'm just forgetting. So I think maybe the workout gives you an opportunity, right? You're going to ask him to shoot in the workout, see if he's capable of it, because he just didn't even try last season at Indiana. But like you said, I think there's only one role he's successful in the NBA, and that's small ball 5. Just because I think he could have the mobility to play that defensively, but all of his offense that he's showing you right now is inside. And so good rebounder, good shot blocker, good inside scorer, but yeah, like we'd have to buy into a pick into the 50s or select him as a UDFA for me to feel excited about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd only take him in the second round, but I feel happy depending on where he fell in the second round. I'm not too concerned about his size. He still showed a great knack for rim protection. He averaged over 2 blocks a game while he was in college. And I think the NBA has a history of, productive centers that are a little undersized. Even better, if he could, expand his game out a little bit, maybe get a jump shot, get a little pip and pop game. I wouldn't mind seeing him at the 4. I think he could be that secondary rim protector, Kyler, that I know you want.
I do.
He's decently mobile on the perimeter. Like I could see him guarding some wings. But really the question I have is just like, can he expand that offensive game? Because you can't play him and another big at the same time. It just doesn't work. So he would really need to get a jump shot or something else, just something else to deepen that bag a little bit. But I like his defense. I like him as a pick and roll partner. He has great hands, great finisher. Reminded me a little bit of like Carlos Boozer in his prime, just the way that he could, cut on the pick and roll and finish. Again, obviously that was, it's a bygone era now. Doesn't mean as much as it used to. But he is still someone you can throw the ball down to off a cut and expect him to, be able to do some stuff in the paint. So if the opportunity to get him somewhere in the second round is there, I think I would take him.
I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of team takes him. Because for me, I mean, like, you got a guy who has played center all throughout college. He's going to be almost 23 on draft night, I believe. But he can't shoot at all. It's almost interesting to see if he could play next to a center in some limited minutes, who can space the floor. Like if he could play with somebody like a Jokic or like a Brook Lopez if he decides to leave the Bucks, or one of those types of players that can theoretically shoot the three ball, then maybe his role opens up a little bit more where he can be that versatile defender, where he can be that secondary rim protection, where he can still score on, high percentage looks, but then where his inability to space the floor at all at this point is maybe covered up a little bit. So that was kind of one thought that I had. If I'm a team that does have a starting five that can space the floor, then maybe he's someone who makes sense to bring in to play some limited minutes at the four, and then for certain matchups, the small ball five. So I think fit will be important for him just to see if he can actually, maybe they can hide some of those skills that you would hope that a player like him would have.
I don't really like him at the four. I think you need him to be an interior defender. I don't like him defending on the perimeter quite as much. He's a little bit mobile, but you're just taking away so much of his impact, I think. Even though he could provide secondary rim protection, I just think all the other things that come with being a secondary rim protector, he wouldn't really excel at. So I think backup center, which I'd take in the second round. I hope they don't take him at 28. Last time we took a center in a similar spot. It wasn't great. Although two times ago we took a center in a similar spot. It actually worked out well for us. So
yeah, we got the greatest draft haul in history for him. So that was great. Shout out to our guy Rudy. All right, let's move to the guy that I think might be the most interesting prospect to talk about. That's going to be a second round pick, and that is Imani Bates. Now, here's a guy who has a really, really interesting history. He was one of the first guys that I saw regularly come up on like my social media feed when he was like 16. And people were comparing him to Kevin Durant. He kind of had a similar build and just an incredible bucket getter, amazing shot creator, awesome size, really thin like KD. And he was somebody who was like touted to be an amazing prospect and somebody who could potentially be an incredible scorer at the next level. But it was really after he graduated high school and went into college that's when the trouble started following him a little bit. He really struggled to get consistent minutes at Memphis, the first school that he went with. He didn't just his offensive game didn't flourish nearly as well as a lot of people were hoping he would. While he was in Memphis, he was relegated to a bench role, and he left in the offseason where he went to Eastern Michigan, where he was promised a lot more minutes. And score he did. He averaged over 19 points a game at Eastern Michigan on over 50% true shooting, but then he started having all these off-court issues. He was actually charged with a felony that was later dropped. He was concealing a handgun that he wasn't supposed to have, and the serial numbers had been altered, which obviously is a big no-no, which caused a lot of more questions about, does this guy, is he a high character guy, or is he going to be an issue for your franchise? Dude talks a lot of smack despite having a very imperfect game. He's supposedly very cocky. He doesn't pass at all. And he's just a guy who wants to go out and get buckets for himself. But at the same time, you look at those videos, even going back to when he was 15, 16 years old, the talent is undeniably there as a scorer. So here's my question for you guys. Would you even consider, if you were a team with a second round pick, would you consider even bringing a guy like that into your organization, considering his very rocky history the past couple of years?
I can go. I wouldn't, personally. And it has nothing to do with his off the court stuff. I mean, that's not great, but he's young. You do dumb things. I don't know what his upbringing was like, but I believe in redemption. I wouldn't hold that against him. I just don't think he's a particularly good basketball player. I don't think he's shown that, especially in the college level. I don't think there's a prospect in this draft that I've wanted to like more, but just don't, than Imani Bates. Looking at his highlights, again, he averaged almost 20 points a game, but he did that on about 40% shooting, which isn't great efficiency. Everything was done kind of in the mid-range, kind of taking tough shots. He didn't really show any desire, any ability to finish near the rim. And I don't think he has the length or the strength to finish near the rim. He'd have to be kind of like a mid-range guy. And I just don't think that he has that capability in the NBA. I really think he's going to be out of the league as soon as his rookie contract's up. I don't have a lot of faith in him.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a guy that wants to be the guy, and it's just not going to be at the NBA level. He's another guy we're going down tiers from the Cam Whitmore build. We got Cam Whitmore, then we got GG Jackson, then we got Imani Bates down here. Um, Talking about lack of putting pressure on the rim, yeah, I just don't think he's athletic enough to do it. That's really what separates him and puts him lower than the other shot creators in this class, is that he has some good coordination and skills, just not very athletic, which is kind of an important thing to be a good scorer. Unless you're really elite, you can be a high level scorer without being athletic, but he's just not that. And again, apart from scoring, which he didn't even do that efficiently, what is he doing to impact the game? And I just think in the second round, give me the 23-year-old Trace Jackson Davis, who you're more sure of what he can do outside of scoring and just more defined role. The Jazz have actually, if you look at their second round history, they typically like to take the older guys that are a little bit more, you have the bigger sample size on, because you're getting role players. You're not getting, I mean, there's some exceptions. Obviously, Nikola Jokic was taken in the second round during a Taco Bell commercial, which always gets brought up. But for the most part, you're getting role players, and he just doesn't seem to be a positive impact role player as much as a guy who wants to be the center of attention.
Yeah, it's I think my biggest issue with him is that if he can solve his attitude issues, his off-court issues, and if he could really commit to becoming a more well-rounded player, I mean, you could see that it might happen. He's got the size, he has enough athleticism, enough fundamentals, enough footwork that you could see if he fully committed to becoming that he might be a rotation guy. But the issue with him is that I don't see any future in which that happens by the time a rookie contract is up. He's a guy that I think needs to be humbled, play a lot more minutes either overseas or in the G League or somewhere else, and really learn that he is not the guy. He is not that number one option. He's never going to be that number one option. But if he fully commits to being a good role player, then maybe he's somebody who could make it into the league. So I just don't think that it makes sense to draft a guy like Imani Bates, because I don't think that he's actually going to become valuable for your franchise, or even have a possibility of becoming valuable for your franchise for at least a few years down the road. So for me, if you really want to take a flyer in the 50s, sure, you do you, put him on a two-way contract or whatever, and then kind of see what happens. But just for me, I wouldn't be willing to risk anything other than a very late second rounder on him, just because I don't think he's going to ever be in a position in the near future to be valuable to any team that's going to be good. All right. Well, sorry, Lana, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it's too bad because I think he looks compelling just looking at him. He looks like a basketball player. And his highlights are fun, but yeah, I don't think he has enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you want pure upside swing in the second round, then that's the archetype. But I don't know. I'll have him on my top 50 big board. So I'll have a draftable ranking for him because of the shot creation flashes that are just rare to get at that part of the draft from a guy with actual length. Usually the shot creators you get in the second round are 6'1", So
yeah. Your Isaiah Thomas's.
Yeah. So shot creation in the second round with actual NBA length makes me think he's going to get drafted by somebody, especially if you didn't have a first round pick and you're just taking one pick, I'd just take it on somebody who might be more than your 11th man, but might also phase out. But then you just,
it's a risk.
A second. Yeah. So it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Well, for me, I always love to see great talent, so I hope that he's able to put it together. I hope that we see him in an NBA uniform being productive at some point in his career, but I think we can all agree that it's not going to be anytime soon. Moving on, we have two more guys for you that we're going to go through fairly quickly here. The next one is Jordan Walsh. If there's a guy that I love in the second round, for me personally, it's probably Jordan Walsh. He was a freshman out of Arkansas, and the dude is just an absolute pit bull on the defensive end of the floor. He's 6'6" with a 7'2" wingspan, and he's so athletic and versatile for like what you would be getting at this point in the draft, that he's just somebody who you can see being a guy who just wreaks havoc on the defensive end of the court, who's always guarding those scoring wings, who's just making their life difficult for several minutes every night. He kind of reminds me, at least in the defensive sense, of somebody like a Lou Dort or like a Dylan Brooks, which obviously his game's not like perfectly tailored to either one of those, but somebody who is that kind of a defensive impact. He projects as being a 3-and-D guy. However, there's a big fat red question mark next to the 3 part of that statement. He only shot 27% from 3 last year on fairly low volume. So even though he projects to be someone who could definitely defend at the next level, and he's got the great size and athleticism to do it, it's will he ever be even somewhat helpful on the other end of the court?
No, he won't be. That's why I don't really like him all that much. I've talked about a lot of guys that I'm out because they can't play defense. He's a guy that I'm out because I don't think he's ever going to play good offense. Like, you look at his shot, and when he releases it, it looks like it's going in. Like the first couple of Arkansas games I watched, I thought he was a legitimate 3-and-D player. I was like, that shot looks good, but he has horrible misses on a shot that looks clean out of his hand. So I think it's a touch issue. It's not something that you're going to get into an NBA coach. They're going to dramatically change his shot, and all of a sudden he's going to be good. It's the fact that he just, I don't think, has the touch to shoot. I also don't think he has a handle. Passing, maybe fine. Okay, he can't finish. Same thing. I think it's a touch issue. He shot less than 50% at the rim. So just guys that are really, really big liabilities on one end of the floor are just guys that are really hard to sell me that they're playoff guys. Now, could he be like an extreme small ball 5? I think that's the only thing that could convince me, because he actually hustles a heck of a lot on rebounds, and he's actually a pretty decent offensive rebounder. So kind of like a cleanup offensive role, maybe kind of like what you guys were talking about with Jackson Davis, where maybe playing alongside a 5 that knows how to space the floor, and then him being basically the dunker cleanup spot. That's the only thing. And then him being like the 4 do-it-all defender. That's the only way I think I see him succeeding. And I just don't know how many centers are actually gonna help him out that much offensively. So love the defense. Probably going to be the best defender in the second round, but there's a reason he's going to be available in the second round despite that defense.
Yeah. I think I'm a little higher on him than Kyler is. Not to say I think he's going to be like a great player, but no, I think I would consider taking him in the second round. I love his defense. He's a dog. You draft him to be kind of like your Draymond Green, right? He's your hustler. He's your antagonist. He's the one who's diving for the balls, getting on the nerve, under the skin of like the other team's best players, which I think is a lot of value in it of itself. I think a lot of successful teams have a player like that. I absolutely agree. I don't think he's going to be a good scorer ever in the league. That's just not who he is. It's not how he's built. But I do like his playmaking a little bit. I think he showed flashes of being, a good playmaker, a good passer. I think he's able to make some good reads. So I would not mind a position where, you play him as like a 4, maybe in a small lineup, and kind of run the offense around him, make him be the playmaker in the high post or something like that.
You think he's that level of playmaker? Like passing is the best thing he does on offense.
For sure.
But is he the Draymond where you're running your actions through him? If not, what is he in the playoffs on offense where the teams aren't just going to leave him alone like Ben Simmons?
Yeah. What he's got to be. And obviously, like, all these guys you're taking risks on in the second round, right? But I think he has that kind of potential. Not to say he gets there, but I think he could be a decent playmaker.
Which it is kind of hard to understate how questionable his offensive game, whether that's passing, whether that's scoring, whatever it is going to be at the next level. But if there is one kind of saving grace about that, is that he is still young. He was just a freshman this year. And if you're going to draft him, then you're drafting him with the hopes that you think you can turn him into something more than what he currently is on the offensive end of the floor. We don't have a lot of flashes that say anything like that. I love Anthony Black, so I've watched quite a few games where Jordan Walsh was playing a lot of big minutes. and it's hard to look at his tape and say like that's what we could build on for the next level. But if the Jazz or whoever else decides to draft him can see him in the second round as, oh, we can actually see flashes of this or that or whatever, then maybe he's a guy that you take a flyer on. But it's just so tough because you absolutely love one end of the floor and you're absolutely terrified of the other. So it'll be interesting, but the fact that he's not 22 and that he's only 19 makes me feel a little bit better about the possibility of drafting him.
Maybe. It's just you're going to have to convince me hard that he's ever going to be anything offensively.
Yeah, put him with some NBA coaches, so he'll figure it out.
Maybe.
Big question mark.
He wasn't like, it's not like he was a decent shooter in AAU and was just bad in Arkansas. The dude sucked at shooting his whole freaking life. So
he's never going to average more than 10 points a game in the NBA.
No. I don't think that's his role. We're talking about a second round. And for the record, I just dogged on the guy. He's going to be in my top 50 as well. But probably just because I'm barely going to scout 50 guys. But yeah, it's just, oh boy. Show me how many one-way players are playing in the playoffs this year on teams that made it past the first round. And then I'll tell you why you should draft Jordan.
I'm kidding. All right.
Okay.
All right, let's move to the last guy we're going to talk about in this episode, which is actually a fan-submitted guy. So we weren't planning to talk about him, but we love you guys. We love you listening and interacting with you on our channel. So we definitely want to talk about who you're interested in hearing about. The Jazz did have a workout with a guy by the name of Kai Sotto, who has a very interesting history. He actually declared for the draft last year, but he went undrafted, and he's played his last 2 seasons overseas in the National Basketball League in Australia for the Adelaide 36ers, which for those of you who love the Jazz, that was actually who Joe Ingles got his first offer from in the NBL. Interesting, he's 7'3", and he's Filipino. He's the second tallest guy in his country, which was interesting as I was researching him. So he's huge, super long, but he's not the most skilled player in the world. Playing in the NBL, which is not an elite league, he put up 7 points, 5 rebounds, and a block a game in 14 minutes. So it's not like he was exactly wowing us with the stat line. In his first year with the Adelaide 36ers, he actually flashed some three-point ability where he shot almost 39%. Granted, it was on low attempts, but at least there's a possibility that it could turn into something. Although this last year, he only shot 22% from three. So you wonder if that was just kind of a one-hit wonder year with his shooting ability. With the Jazz hopefully losing our backup center options with Damian and Azubuike, we're going to need somebody to fill that backup 5 role. And the question we have for you is that he's not somebody who's eligible to be drafted, but he is somebody who can be signed by a team in the offseason. Do you think that the Jazz should even consider him as somebody we should put on our roster that could potentially play, 12 minutes a night to back up Walker Kessler?
I mean, I'd give him a summer league invite. He's another guy, if you just look at his highlights, which is pretty much all I had time to do, you see flashes that excite you, especially rim protecting, just because when you're 7'3", you can protect the rim. And so he's got some really nice highlight blocks, showed a willingness to shoot, showed an ability to do simple post moves and actually score with a little bit of touch. But those are all flashes. It's not something that he does consistently. But that's what we're talking about in undrafted free agency. So, yeah, I'd give him an invite. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I say I wouldn't hate if we have a roster spot open before training camp starts. We give him a minimum. Maybe give him some time with the stars. See what he can do there. The idea of having constant rim protection is always nice. It was always a big problem with Gobert, right? As well, as soon as he was out, people just used it at the rim. So having that would be nice if he has that type of potential. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't be opposed to, getting him some development, see what he can do. Maybe earning himself an actual rotation spot at some point. His height is always intriguing, and his ability to shoot at that height especially is something that's going to have some value. So sure.
Yeah. And for being so tall, he's actually decently mobile, but he's also not very strong. which is probably why he's decently mobile. So if you want him to get some more strength, you're probably sacrificing his mobility to do so. But just because the bulk up that frame is actually a lot of weight. But so yeah, I don't know. He's fine. Took a look at him. Thought he was worth a shot.
And there's been some reports that he's worked out with like 4 or 5 teams. I know that he signed another contract, I believe, with the Japanese team, but there's a clause that he gets to opt out if he signed with an NBA team. So I'm sure if the Jazz don't sign him, somebody else will. And seeing as backup center is a position of need and we're not necessarily trying to win next year, I don't think there's any harm in taking a flyer on him and seeing, can he be a guy who we could potentially get for cheap and might turn into something a little bit more down the road. He's still young. I think he's only like 22 years old. So he's definitely someone who could continue to get better as the years go. But if you look at him comprehensively, like if you watch his highlights, sure, they're interesting. But if you watch a full game, you realize how limited he is as a player right now, other than being a rim protector. So it's worth a flyer. But then again, I don't like Doak or anybody else who was backing up Kessler last year. So I'll be happy to see anybody who could come in and potentially take those minutes who has a higher upside.
Yep.
All right. Well, there we go. We gave you some more names to chew on, and we are super excited, as with the rest of Jazz Nation, to see what happens here in just a couple short weeks. Once again, drop us a like, drop a follow. If you ask us any questions or things you want us to go over in the podcast, we would be happy to go over them in our next episode. This has been another edition of the Upper Bowl Perspective. Thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you soon.